I'm actually in my camper van
Oh, really?
in the parking lot of iHub. I've been downsizing my life and recognizing that like I can do more if I'm doing less in my own life. Does that make sense? And living in a camper van has been really aligned for me, and I've really, really enjoyed it. But I don't recommend it to people at all.
So the real question is, are you
Yeah.
married?
I'm not married.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you must have a very forgiving wife and understanding.
That would not have been. Yeah.
So while you're single, the camper van, that totally works.
It is
probably.
working right now.
Right.
Yep.
So just enjoy it. Enjoy the ride, I guess.
Yep. For sure. So if you could kind of rewind and tell me what initially sparked your interest in getting into the world of treatment facilities. How did that journey begin for you?
Yeah. So, in undergrad, I was trying to figure out, I went to the University of Utah, and I was trying to figure out what am I going to do. And it was a sociology major, and realized sociology isn't going to get me anywhere. And so I had an instructor in an institute class that was a marriage and family therapist, and he taught let's see, I think it was intro to marriage or course or eternal marriage course of some sort like that.
Yeah.
And let's just say I took it like 3 times because I enjoyed it so much, and also because I was trying to figure out, am I ever going to get married?
Yeah.
You know? And so I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed interacting with him, and so I looked into marriage and family therapy programs. So that's what I did my master's degree in marriage and family therapy in Wichita, Kansas at Friends University. And when I got done with my degree, I needed to find a place where I could have a supervisor that would supervise me for 2 years to get my full licensure. And so I ended up at a residential treatment center for adolescents in southern Utah, and where I found a supervisor and fell in love with working with teenagers. And at the time I was young then and maybe closer to their age. And then over the years, last 25 years, I feel like that even though now I'm old enough to be not just the parent of the kids that we serve, but also of the staff, that they keep me young in my brain, right? Even though my body's not young anymore. So that's where my love started, and I've been working in various different treatment centers and helped start a couple of residential programs as well as a psychiatric hospital here in Utah County. Like I said, over the last 25 years, and seen so many different changes in the mental health treatment world.
Yeah.
Right, we've come a long way from a standpoint of removing stigma related to mental health issues. About 15 years ago, when I was at the Provo Canyon Behavioral Hospital, that one of my responsibilities was go out in the community and educate the community, like high schools and colleges, on suicide awareness and prevention. And 15 years ago, people didn't raise their hand and say, "Hey, I'm going to treatment.
Yeah.
I'm in therapy, right? I'm working on myself." It just didn't happen.
Right.
And so it's been really nice to see over the last 10, 15 years where people have recognized that, hey, it's okay to get help. It's actually a good thing to get help for yourself. And so I think it's promising to see that people are more open to working on not just their physical wellness, but also their mental wellness.
Yeah, that's been a really big deal for me. I remember growing up that talking about if I was unhappy, like that felt taboo. It was like, no, like if you're struggling, rub some dirt in it, figure it out, like choose to be happy. And it's been extremely helpful for me personally to be able to recognize, explore, and talk about what I'm experiencing in my head and what might be causing different experiences, like some depression that I've experienced, or anxiety, or the loneliness that I frequently feel. So yeah, it's been an interesting kind of story arc in the world of mental health. I'm curious if you could point out a couple of significant, I'm going to call them historical pivot points, not that it's ancient history, but over the past 20 or 30 years, if you've noticed what has caused changes in the experience of those that you associate with your treatment facilities, or interest, if like a floodgate has been opened after certain events. Can you give me a little bit of detail there?
Yeah. So I think that we've come a long way with learning more about how certain diagnoses present themselves. Like you were alluding to, Connor, 25, 30 years ago, it was all about just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? And rub some dirt in it, and that's how you get better. Or in religious cultures, pray harder, right? To get better. And so I think through the process of learning more about mental health, learning more about specifically depression and anxiety are two diagnoses that many people struggle with. As we learn more about those diagnoses, then we learn more about what can we do to treat them, and also learning skills ourselves to be able to help us more effectively self-regulate. And so I think because of the increased awareness, it's allowed for, like I said, the decrease in stigma and more opportunities for us to realize, hey, there's things that we can do differently. And sometimes the combination of therapy and medicine and medication is what helps. And sometimes that's the medicine maybe is just for a short period of time. Sometimes it's for longer periods depending on the situation. But I think that really it's just been creating, as we've learned more about mental health and diagnoses, I think that's helped us as a society. More recently, in the last handful of years, the pandemic really brought up a lot of things for us, right? And I think the combination of the pandemic and digital and or social media has done a lot of exacerbation of anxiety specifically, and specifically social anxiety, where people that had maybe some budding anxiety or issues with anxiety previously, when they hunkered down in their basement for months, maybe even years, and that was very acceptable, both by society and sometimes by their parents as well. They became so comfortable with that. Then when it's time to come out of that, it's very difficult to do that. And for individuals, once again, to try to learn skills and techniques to be able to regulate themselves when they're feeling that level of anxiety, it obviously creates some challenges for us as a society. So that most recently, I think, was a really big kind of pivotal change. And we've seen a lot of those ripple effects within the residential treatment world. I think we've seen a lot of ripple effects of those also within the effects of that in the academic world as well. And I don't think we've still seen all the ramifications of of what that's going to do in the future for individuals that didn't really learn the things that they needed to academically during that period of time too.
Yeah, I've had some conversations with friends who are teachers, and there's definitely some significant differences that have been experienced over the last decade or so with regards to education and what happens in and out of the classroom, and that gap of COVID. You described a little bit about someone kind of operating, being comfortable in their basement, then figuring out, like, how do I rejoin the society that's going on around me? If I'm a parent, I'm not a parent, but I'm sure that it's most often the parents who are coming to your organization and saying, my teenager is XYZ, therefore, like, we need your help. What is that parent, like, if I'm that parent with a teenager who's struggling, what am I seeing and afraid of that brings me to your door?
Yeah. Oftentimes when they're feeling depressed and with adolescents specifically, sometimes it manifests differently than with adults. So with adults, many times you've got them, they're really down, they're really like melancholy, pulling the drapes down, all that type of stuff. With adolescents, many times we see them presenting with what's called agitated depression. So they have a heightened level of agitation. Hey, you're asking them to do the dishes, and they go off on you, right? And they're losing it for very minimal kind of and minuscule reasons. And so trying to help them to understand to some extent like what they are feeling, helping a teenager to slow down enough to be able to have a conversation and ask about like ask the hard questions. You know, my kids are now young adults, and yet we have many conversations, and still do, throughout their lives of, hey, how are you doing? How are you feeling? I mean, are you feeling depressed? Like if you were to rate yourself on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being the most depressed, 0 being the least, where are you at? And even specifically asking questions about, you know, have you had suicidal thoughts? Some parents think that if you ask them those questions, even more, those detailed questions about have you felt suicidal, that somehow that's
It'll,
going to
like,
put the
push 'em
idea in
that
their head,
direction.
and
Yeah.
it's absolutely incorrect, right? It's like it actually asking them those specific questions gives them permission
Yeah.
to be able to talk about it, and because sometimes it's hard to just to think of like how can I say this?
Yeah.
How can I say that in my own mind, like I'm thinking about hurting myself?
Right.
That's a pretty scary place to be, and a pretty dark place to be. And if a parent or a loved one can ask that specific question and give them permission to acknowledge that, then we know where we're at, and then we can pursue the appropriate steps and measures to get treatment services in place.
I'm kind of a testimony of that. I remember specifically the day, moment, and place where my dad opened the door to that conversation, and he said, like, "Are you thinking about harming yourself? And is suicide on the table?" And I just remember feeling like this overwhelming sense of relief that he was okay asking me. And every time I think about it, I feel this like deep gratitude and an emotion for someone who loved me enough to just ask, and to know that I didn't have to hide the thoughts that I was having. So yeah, I'm a big fan of those kinds of conversations. Can you give me and any other parents who might be listening practical tips on how or when or where or who, like to introduce that conversation? Because I think that having witnessed some less than cordial relationships between family members, that I could see there would be a lot of like hesitation in feeling like you're going to go about it the wrong way or do it at the wrong time. And I'm just curious if you have practical tips.
Yeah, in my perspective, and this is maybe my personal and professional perspective, what I did and have tried as a parent over the years, I think it's important to have ongoing dialogue, and the idea and the act of having dinner together as a family is sadly a lost activity, and yet such an important one. In my own life with my own children, we had ongoing dialogue at the family dinner table about, hey, how did your day go today at junior high or high school or elementary? And asking about that, and then having that lead into questions of, how are you feeling? And not every time are we asking, are you depressed or suicidal, right? But however, when you're having consistent dialogue, and then it doesn't seem so. It just seems more natural, right? As you kind of go down those steps, and if your child's or your teen seems like they're kind of down and not doing so well and kind of melancholy, then to be able to ask those kind of follow-up questions. And it also doesn't mean that we always do that in front of the other siblings as well, right? You get a sense of that at the dinner table, and then it's like, going into the office or another room to have have further and more in-depth conversation. I remember when my kids were young, sit down and just have a discussion with them about how they're doing, how you're doing in school, how you're doing socially. And, a couple of different occasions with both of my sons, they had expressed like that they didn't feel like they had friends. And that's a hard thing for a parent to hear, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard for a kid to try to navigate through junior high without really having friends to lean on.
Yeah.
And that can lead to them feeling depressed, right? And so setting a goal, I set goals with them of like, okay, let's figure out how you can, go about reaching out to some kids that you have interested in hanging out with, and let's create some activities for you to be able to do that. And so being actively involved in brainstorming with them about how, what they're specifically struggling with, and then how you can go about as a parent to try to help them with those particular challenges that they have.
Yeah. I love that. I think that having a consistent time where conversations at least are introduced is really crucial. And I grew up in a household similarly where we had family dinner every single night, and it was pretty taboo to miss it. Like if there was a soccer practice or a friend's birthday party or anything like that, like it took a lot for either my mom or dad to say like, okay, you can. Like we were expected to all be in our seat and be there together.
They were doing it right, it sounds like.
I look back and I'm so grateful for that. There were definitely times where I hated it back then, but now I see the alternative is heartbreaking.
Yeah. And it seems very simple, and yet the majority of the kids that we see in treatment are not sitting at the dinner table with their families.
Can't
They're
remember
not.
the last time they've experienced that.
It just doesn't happen.
Yep.
Right. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah, totally. Speaking of the dinner table specifically and where our minds are, we think frequently about how technology and specifically our smartphones and social media play a role in our loneliness or in our relationships building or breaking down. And one of the rules at our family dinner table growing up was no phones. Like, can't be out at all. If it's in your pocket, it stays in your pocket. If it comes out of your pocket, it goes out of the room. And I've watched this shift in my own family where now not only do the kids bring our phones out, but my parents are on their phones just as much, if not more, than we are. And I go to dinner with my grandma and grandpa, and they're watching fun animal videos and scrolling through and seeming to enjoy it. And I personally love the time I spend on my phone, which is why my average screen time is over 6 hours a day. But while having that, like we've invited the smartphone to be a constant friend or maybe like a crutch when we're feeling uncomfortable, or when we have a question we think we need it answered immediately. And I'm just curious how you would describe your view of technology and how it supports or harms, becomes a barrier or a launch pad to connection. Just like how do you, in your own life and dealing with those in your treatment centers, where do screens come in? How do they play a role?
Yeah, I think, moderation and balance is really the key, because I think certainly there are pros and cons to digital and social media. When I think about my own household, we didn't have a huge challenge with the phones at the dinner table, and partially because I've got 3 kids, so I have 2 sons and a daughter, and my sons really, they didn't care. They could care less about social media, right? Really? And so they rarely even had their phones with them. It was more so when my daughter came that she ended up being, like many females, more engaged with social media. When I think about the dinner table piece, I think there's some times at the dinner table where it can be interesting to as a part of conversation, as a question arises, it's really easy to be able to ask Siri about the answer to a particular question, and that can actually stimulate conversation. So I think there's positive parts of that. To your point, though, when you're talking about parents, I think that many parents are like, hey, we don't want kids pulling out phones to text or scroll social media or whatever during dinner, because we want to be present here. And yet, and I know I've been a violator of this as well, our phones buzz in our pocket, and then next thing you know, we're on it. And we as parents really have to lead by example. If we're asking them to be off their phone for a few minutes, and it's not that long, right? Then it really needs to start with us. Yeah. So I just think a balance. I think as long as at the table you're able to have some type of engaging conversation, and sometimes the phone can help that. I think that's okay. When we're all on our phones and we're all texting different people, or all scrolling through social media all at the same time, and we're physically in the same place, but mentally we're totally other places, then that's not obviously helpful to anybody, right? And that is where the decrease in connection really lies. So, when I was a kid, it was like, hey, we would have loved to have watched TV while we're eating dinner, right? But my parents were not about to have that,
Yeah.
you know? And so we've gone from that day and age of like, hey, no, we got to eat around the dinner table without TV, to next thing you know, we're at the dinner table, but we've got these devices that are right there next to us. And so it makes it a little bit harder,
Yeah.
you know, to avoid that. And so I think, I think avoiding them as much as possible and utilizing them to help to stimulate the conversation, I think is potentially a good thing.
Yeah. Okay. You just a minute ago mentioned the word connection when you were describing what might or might not be happening when our screens are around us. And I'm curious how you would describe connection and its involvement to the root problems and or the solutions that help those that you work with in your residential treatment facilities. How much is connection at play for why they need your help, and how much does connection play a role in getting them to a good place as they graduate from your program? Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Like where does connection play into that story?
Yeah, I mean, really, connection is the underlying key to all of it, right?
Really?
And it starts with the families. So there's no parent that wakes up one morning and says, hey, I'm going to send my son or daughter to a residential treatment program in another state, right? It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
There are so many failures that take place at lower levels of care before they make probably the most difficult decision that they've made in their lives to that point.
Right.
And so those failures come, though, from the lack of connection that they have with their kids. And they may be trying, and yet for whatever reason, they're not able to connect with their son or their daughter. And part of it has to do with just, spending quality time with them. More and more nowadays, we have two parents that have to work in order to be able to afford to live. And so there's less ability to spend that quality time with their children. And so that decreases the connection. And then when we go back to just screens, oftentimes from a very young age, screens are used to entertain and or babysit to some extent, right? Yeah. And that's decreasing connection there, because we're not really even having interaction with them, with these young children, and and they're interacting with the screen, and that's obviously not helpful with connection. So it starts with the family system and their ability to connect with each other. And as they haven't had that success, and typically the kids that we see, they've acted out in various different ways, whether it's using substances, whether it's running away, whether it's attempting to harm themselves, really significant acting out in an attempts to gain connection.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so as parents make this difficult decision, they come to us. The kids, lives with us. Parents will be involved in person and virtually for family therapy sessions. Our effort is to obviously to reestablish connections, build relationships of trust, and yet the other piece of that is creating a connection with a therapist, because as a kid comes to us and they've never met us before, the ability of a therapist to be able to create a connection with a teenager is not an easy thing, and so having the therapist create the connection with the teen, create the connection with the parents, and then be able to be that catalyst for change within the family system, to be able to recreate and build that connection with the teen and with the parents, and helping them to identify and understand what are the barriers that are preventing them from connecting. And many times with parents and with teens and the teens that are having struggles, is potentially a lack of validation on the parents' part, of validating a kid's feelings, and so then a kid feeling like, well, I'm not understood, I'm not heard, I'm not seen, and so trying to teach some practical skills that way of how parents can go about validating, reflectively listening to a kid, so that they feel like, hey, my parent sees me, they hear me, and that starts to recreate and reconnect those bonds. Yeah.
As you're talking through this, I am having like flashbacks through my life of moments where I was making a stupid decision, trying to find connection. And as you were talking about having a therapist, I've been surprised and impressed and grateful to find out that having a third party that's not directly involved to the rut or the chaos or whatever struggle you're experiencing, having that third party be able to come in as an educated and just like safe voice is really, really helpful. We only have a couple of minutes left. And I want to ask, coming out of a program where a teen is potentially learning how to step away from unhealthy behaviors, understanding themselves and the world better, and then trying to re-enter a place where they were experiencing a lot of pain previously. What does that transition look like to help them maintain the ability to find healthy connection when they're going back to maybe like the grounds of discomfort? Does that make sense? Like coming out of, okay, I've learned these things. I think about it as like dog training. Like dogs can learn amazing skills, but then when they're back at home in their old stomping grounds, it's easy to kind of revert to old tendencies or to feel the same fears. So any thoughts there, and then we'll offer it up for anything else you want to talk about.
Yeah. So what we try to do in the treatment process is teach the teens and the parents the same skills. And a big focus that we have is dialectical behavioral therapy, which are really practical skills that an individual and or teens or parents can use both in a treatment program, but also outside of the treatment program, right? I mean, I use DBT skills in my own life.
Yeah.
And so teaching them the same skills helps them to create a common dialogue. And as they have that common dialogue, it helps them when they transition back to the home setting, so that the teen can be able to say to the parent, hey, you know what? Hey, I need a little bit of space here right now. And the parent can trust that,
Right.
As opposed to, oh, you're saying you need space, but are you going to go harm yourself again, right? And so being able to, I guess, teach them similar dialogue and teach them practical skills is a big part, I think, of having a successful transition, and specifically teaching the teens emotional self-regulation skills, which is part of what dialectical behavioral therapy entails. Like one of the skills is called TIP, stands for temperature, intense exercise, paced breathing, and paired muscle relaxation. And so these, and like, for instance, like with temperature, one of the really en vogue things to do, not just for young people, but for all of us now, is like a cold plunge, right? We know there's a lot of health benefits from that. And so we can't always cold plunge, but we can grab an ice cube and put it in a bag and put it on the back of our neck and help to ground us.
Yeah.
We teach these kinds of skills to the kids in treatment so that, hey, you know what? You can do that when you go home.
Right.
And you can realize that, hey, it works for you in treatment to ground you with a little bag of ice on your neck. You can do the same thing at home, and also be able to, and parents alike, to do it, right? I mean, and it can obviously help adults as well.
Yeah.
So the practical skills, I think, are a key element to having them safely and successfully transition back to their home environments.
Yeah, I love that. Super helpful. Well, this has been a really beautiful conversation. I've loved that we've been able to touch on how you go about your treatment and helping people, really, really saving lives. Talking about technology, talking about connection, and just in closing, I'm curious if you had 30 seconds to give your message that you hope would be received to our listeners. What would you say to those listeners? What's your takeaway message?
Yeah, I think when it comes down to connection, as much as there's some downfalls to social media and digital media, that's not the key element that is driving issues into our young people and to our families. It really starts with the family system. It really starts with spending time together, with quality time, and being able to create those connections. In my opinion, what social media does is it exacerbates what potentially is going on in the home. And so if there's good things that are going on in the home and a kid's on social media, then they're probably going to be scrolling through and finding some of those good things that they connect with.
Right.
If there are negative things going on in the home and negative feelings as far as relationships are concerned, then they're going to be searching those types of things, right? And they're going to be fed those. And so
It becomes kind of an amplifier.
Absolutely, and like an echo chamber, right? And so I think really in my perspective, I think is we can make sure that as families that we are, and parents, spending quality time with our children, with our teenagers, and even with our young adults. I mean, that's where I'm at in my stage of life was with young adults. And if one of my kids is struggling, it's like, hey, I feel like I need to spend more time with them. And that doesn't mean that you're just sitting down and have a conversation. It's like you're going and playing pickleball, you're going and, shooting hoops, and then having just some organic conversation with them to be able to reestablish a connection, help them know that hey, you're there, you care, and that you're in it together.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Well, you're a hero. Thank you so much for taking this time to explore these topics with me. And we're excited to just have a relationship with you. I felt connected, and I'm grateful to have learned what I learned. So thank you so much, Brent.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Okay.